Good morning. Right, hold on.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm late.
Okay, so we are on 11A, about almost halfway down. And Gemara picks up with Indian, with, no, we didn't, wait a second. Nagayim B'Yalo, so we're about a third of the way down, about 15 lines down.
I think we're at Mikra Ma'at v'halachot Mevot.
So there's things that are, why are they considered hanging by a thread? Because they are, there's only a little bit of writing about it, but there are many laws about it. Right. We have in the Bryce and the going be all those things related to things. The guy refers to Mastara and things, and Bahalos means the tuma that you get by being in the same room as tuma. So these are examples of not much written, but many halachas. The guy Mikra, what really you think that Masorah is there's like paragraphs and paragraphs, 2 parshias about Tadri and Masorah about the guy. Mikra Merubahu. So there's a lot of script, a lot of Torah on it. Rav Papa Hachikam. Rav Papa says this is what it means. The guy Mikra Merubahu halachas mulach. It's the other way around. There's a lot of text about it, but not that many details, right? I mean, it tells you details, but there aren't a lot of, some of these convoluted things that we were talking about yesterday, exceptions and conditions and things like that. But ahalos, but the laws of tuma and an ohel, mikra mu'av halachas mu'av. There you have only a little bit of text and a lot of laws. Minus them, what's the difference? Why are you even telling us this? It tells you that if you have, if you're uncertain about something in the rules of Torah, I am B'chai, go read the Torah. But if you want to figure out something about Tuma in the room, I must need to know. You have to look in the Mishnah. You're not going to find much in the Torah. Okay. Dinim. What about monetary laws, torts? Michtav Kesivan. So the Mishnah said that it's only, what does it say exactly? It said, back to the Mishnah with the wording. You have what to rely on in the text of the Torah. So he wants to know, what do you mean you have what to rely on? It tells you all the details, right? The whole Parshas Mishpatim tells you, blow by blow exactly what your responsibilities are for penalties and so on, and everything is written there. There's nothing. We're talking about Rabbi's opinion of Tanya. Rabbi Omer, nefesh shachas, nefesh mama. Here's the thing in the laws of courts that when it says that you have to repay for a life that you took, you have to repay with another life. It doesn't mean a life. It means monetary harm. How do you know? Maybe it really means that a murderer has to be not a murderer, but someone who accidentally kills, or if an ox kills another ox, maybe your ox has to be put to death, right? Maybe it means literally. So, never nasino lamato, never nasino lamalo. We have the verb to give in both cases. So when it says sata nefesh tachas nefesh, you have to give a life for a life. It also says v'nasan b'flilik, that when there's judgment against somebody, you have to pay. Okay, we're using the same verb nasan, give. So just as paying in court is obviously paying money, so too we extend that to v'nasan nefesh tachas nefesh, that you pay monetarily and not with an actual.
Dov, your audio's bouncing in and out again.
We can go ahead and come back in then. Okay, is this any better?
Sounds better, yeah.
Okay, tell me if it breaks up again. Okay, next thing in the Mishnah was avodas, the sacrifices. So that we said they have support in the text. Michtav ksiva. What do you mean they have support? All the details are written there. We have parshias and parshias of details in the sacrifice. Well, Nisracha, are you getting breaking up now again? I'm hearing a lot of static. I'm going to try one more time. I'm going to dial in by phone along with the video. So hang on. All right, that didn't work. So I don't know what to tell you. I'll just reposition the phone a bit. Hope this is better. Can you hear me?
Okay.
All right. Okay, so what is it about the avodah, about sacrifices, that is not explicitly written in the text? The carrying, the transferring of the blood. So there's 4 parts of the sacrifice. Either Kabbalah Saddam, capturing the blood from the exiting the animal, carrying it to the altar, and sprinkling it on the altar. The 4 things. So all those things are explicit, but the carrying, the transferring the blood is not so explicit. The Tanya, we have a brisa, the krivu zu Kabbalah Saddam. When the Torah says, and they shall sacrifice it, but literally karod is close, they shall bring it close, that is referring to carrying the blood from the animal where it's slaughtered to the altar. The Torah specifically use this word v'hikrivu d'chsiv v'hikriv hakohen asakol v'kir mizbecha. The kohen brings it close and causes it to and burns it on the altar. That's referring to bringing the limbs to the ground of the altar. So the bringing, in both cases, both with the bringing the animal parts and bringing the blood, means transferring it. That's an essential part of the service. So, lememra the halacha lo tapka miklal kabbalah, to tell you that it's two separate things, right? Receiving the blood in a bowl and carrying it to the altar is two separate aspects of the sacrifice. Okay, so that's what's not explicit. Taharos. What about the laws of Tumah Tahara? They have actual for it. So again, the Mishnah asks, the Gemara asks, well, not only are they written there, everything's written there. It's all very explicit. What do you mean you have what to rely on? So what's not quite so explicit? How big is a mikvah? What's the minimum capacity of a mikvah to make you tahor? It's not written in the Torah. It just says, go wash your body in water. The Tanya, you wash your body in water and become tahor. But may mikvah, we're talking about a mikvah. Meaning water that's gathered into a pool. As called basaro, all of your body, all of your flesh, mayim shechol gufa olavehed. This means there has to be enough water to cover your whole body. How much is that? Amal broom shalosh. That's 3 cubic feet of water, basically where 3 amas. V'shiro chachamim may make for how much water is that? 40 stuff, right? So it doesn't have to be what's the word for that? But whatever, I don't know what the word is. I'll just say cube. It's not a cube. It's but it's the volume of water in the mikvah, no matter what shape it is, and that's 40 saw. So that is not explicit in the Torah, and that is derived indirectly from the fact that this verse says, why is it 40 saw really? Because 40 saw is the water. Essentially, what the rabbis decided, that's the amount of water displaced by an average person, more or less. Okay. Tumas. And now what about the laws of Tumah? Michtav Ksivan, those are also written. So what's hidden about it? The measure of how much of a sheretz you have to touch in order to become tameh, the minimum is a lentil size. But that's not written in the Torah. The Tanya, we have a brayso. You become tameh to them. Yachol b'chulan, maybe like any amount. It has to be a whole sheretz, right? Or mayhem. Also says from them. So a part of a sheretz. Yachol misah. So maybe it's a part of a very small part. Or bahem. So it also says with them, implying a whole sheretz. So how do you compromise? Okay, so actually, giving me some special. Well, it has to be a big enough piece that is like a full. The rabbi said this is the lentil size. If you have a lentil size piece of a sheretz, that's like as big as some sheretz. Okay, chomet. You also have b'chadasha. This chomet, which is a particular sheretz, I'm not sure which it is, but it when it's born, that's how big it is. Maybe first forms, however it's formed. That's the minimum. So even a piece of a sheretz, as long as it's as big as this chomet at the beginning of its creation, that is the minimum. And that, of course, is not written directly in the Torah. That's derived by the Rabbah. We also do know because now that's halakha. Rabbi Yossi is a different measure, the size of the tail of a lizard, which is a great. What lizard? How much of the tail and so on. So arayos. The Mishnah said that sexual crimes or transgressions are also they have support in the but it's all explicit. And why do you say that it has good support? It's actually all there. So what do we find it there? We're talking about a person is forbidden to sleep with his daughter from one who's not his. Here literally means from daughter of someone a woman that he raped, but really it applies to any other woman, a daughter from of like a stepdaughter, basically. Um, I think just a second. Let me make sure I got that right. Uh,
I think that's right. It doesn't explicitly say that in the Torah.
right. So basically, an illegitimate daughter, right? So
Right.
that's not. Um, so why? So I guess the general assumption is when it says don't sleep with your daughter, it means your daughter, your like legitimate daughter from your wife, or even if you're not married, perhaps. But um, if it's an illegitimate union, like you've committed adultery or rape or whatever, um, so that is that we do not understand directly from the Torah. That's not included directly when the Torah writes. Rava said, "I'm going to Yisuf Bar Pnima." Rav Yisuf told me, "Asya Hena Hena Asya Zima Zima." You have like this complicated Gezerah Shava from these words Hena and Zima that it connects um, that the it connects your legitimate daughter to your illegitimate daughter, and it connects the punishment of the that a bas kohen gets burned for immorality, and for immoral for having sex basically that she's not supposed to. It's also connected to this, which teaches you that the death penalty applies to the illegitimate daughter as well. And the Mishnah concluded, Hein Hein Gufei Torah. These are the fundamentals of the Torah. So Gemara says, what? Hanain, Hanachlo? What do you mean? You're like introducing a hierarchy? Like those things which have better support in the text, those are more important than the other ones. That's not what we expect. Ela Ema, read it, Hein Vehein Gufei Torah. No, these and these, all of these are fundamentals of Torah. In other words, it doesn't matter whether it's something that's written explicitly in the Torah or if it's derived through these hermeneutical principles, they are all considered Torah law. I mean, that's the end of the first paragraph.
Del, you want to try maybe putting on your headphones or something?
Excellent idea. How does that sound?
Better.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Um, yeah. Isn't there one case of this Ariot that, like, it's clear that it would be a violation, but it doesn't really give that case? Is that this one, or I thought there was like one where like you can't sleep with your granddaughter, but it doesn't say anything
Yeah,
about.
that's related to this actually. Yeah, so the Gemara is not being specific. It actually does relate to your granddaughter, and we apply it to the through an illegitimate daughter, and we apply it to the illegitimate daughter herself through, like, of course, like if you can't sleep with the granddaughter, you certainly can't sleep with the daughter, right?
Right.
Kal v'chomer, basically. Even
But,
though usually we say you can't punish somebody through a kal v'chomer,
uh-huh.
because maybe he didn't figure maybe he didn't figure that out. Um, I don't know what the dodge is here.
Okay.
Okay, so now we get into the second parak, which deals with a lot of mystical things. I don't have a lot to say about uh, about the, we're gonna. What I think what really kind of troubled me. I thought about this a lot over Shabbos, and what really, like, I find strange is that. So the Gemara certainly, in many cases has all these mystical things. They deal with spirits and shadim and, various other things. So it's not a foreign concept to the Gemara by any means. But what's strange about it is here, the Gemara, like usually that's in the Agadata, right? That's like related through stories, which is a great way to relate things that may be metaphorical or maybe are not really understood. But here, as we will see, the Gemara kind of applies its usual legal framework. It's like, how do you know that, you can't? What are the elements of Merkava, of the chariot mysticism? And then it brings all these verses to prove it. It's very dry. Whereas this is the kind of material that's usually more colorful. So it's kind of jarring that way.
Um, but see what you think. So, Ein Darshan Barayos Vishlosha. You can't teach things about the rules of sexual immorality with more than in a group of more than three. It has to be done in a more private setting. V'lo b'maseh bereishis v'shnayim. When it comes to dealing with creation, um, then the maximum is two. You can't teach that in public either because of the mystical aspects. And I say mystical in the case of Maaseh Bereishis, like things that are kind of beyond our understanding. And here I suppose I would have to accept cosmologists and physicists and so on who deal with Big Bang and all these things that to me are completely incomprehensible. My son-in-law's father is a physics professor at NYU, and his field is statistics really, but he's on the CERN project in Switzerland where the particle accelerator thing, and basically, they're trying to unravel the creation of the universe, like how the universe came to be what it is. And we had a long car ride once, and he explained a lot of this stuff to me. And he's a very good teacher. It made perfect sense until I opened the car door and got out, and then all of a sudden, it all vanished. I couldn't grasp it anymore. So it appears like the Gemara is talking about things that are too difficult to grasp by the average person, or by most people. So maybe I'm putting my own interpretation on this here, but the idea is that don't lecture on this in public because people aren't they don't have the background to appreciate it, and they could misinterpret it. And the same loba merkava biyachid, and you can't even teach to one person the merkava. That's the chariot mysticism of the type that you see in Chazkel, right? Which we'll deal with. These kind of fiery chariots and angels with wings and various visions like that. Which
It sounds like the Yachid is not. Don't even learn it yourself
could be.
because
Yeah, that's what Rashi says. That's what Rashi says.
Well, that's an interesting point. An interesting point you're making when you're talking about people sleeping with their granddaughters. Is that just a theoretical point he's making, or was it actually happening at the time?
Well, the Torah doesn't. I mean, it prohibits things that not just things that are theoretical, but I mean, in theory it's possible. So the Torah is gonna be explicit about it.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. Often we say if something appears in the responsa literature, it's not that just came out of usually not just theoretical questions. Like people actually ask these questions.
Right.
This is maybe a little different, as Hanan says, because these things are written in the Torah. You teach everything that's written in the Torah, right? And it doesn't mean that people are sleeping with their blood relations, just because it's written in the Torah and it's in the week's parsha, and so you talk about it, right?
No,
not because you know what's going on in your neighborhood.
Well, I mean, in terms of sexual prohibitions, the Torah just assumes, I think, assumes that people will do whatever, any crazy thing. So therefore, it's going to be very explicit about. I'm going to cover every possible case, of sexual impropriety.
Yeah, but your point is a good one in that we I guess the average person is like who's going to sleep with their daughter? I mean, come on, how often does this happen? And yet, I think we all know that it happens more often than we would like to recognize.
Exactly, because it covers a case of even it's not your blood daughter, right? You marry a woman with a daughter, it covers that case.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so lo merkava yachid, and now we have a clause that it's unclear if it modifies only the last statement or all of these statements. So the Gemara will deal with that. Elohim ken hayachacham umevin midato, unless you were a wise person and you really understand the subject matter, then it's okay to teach it or to expound on it. So as I said before, I think the point is don't be teaching this stuff to people who aren't on that level to understand. Kol misakal barba dvarim rasui lo keilu lo ba'la. Anybody who examines these four things that we will just detail in a minute, better if you had never been born. Mala mala malamata, what's above, what is below. In other words, um, probably means, you know, what's above the heavens. Like, so it could be, I mean, you could interpret this however you want. You could be talking about like don't involve yourself in astrophysics. It's too high up there; you'll never understand it. Or it could mean mystical things like what's above the heavens and these celestial beings that are dealt with in Kabbalah and so on. So what's above, what's below, malafani, malachar, what's before and what is after. So I guess true to form, the Mishnah is not detailing what this is because the average person reading it won't really understand it anyway. The kol shelo chasal kavod kano, someone who doesn't honor his creator, rasulo shelo balalam. Better if you'd never been born. This appears to be alluding to like by speculating about things that you have no understanding of in God's creation, you'll end up denying God's role in it or misattributing things or so on.
To get back to the other point about like the last Mishnah that we did, like is this completely rabbinic, or are the rabbis saying that the Torah, is
That's a great question. That's a great question. Not sure what to say about that. Most of the sources that we'll deal with here are from Yechezkel and Yeshayahu, so they're not in the five books of the Torah, but they are in the Tanakh, which we said yesterday. That seems to classify it as kind of a weak support.
right, exactly,
Yeah, it's a good point. I didn't think of that, but yeah, follow on to that is like these are things with weak support, and yet, as the last Mishnah said, they're all part of Torah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Gemara tries to figure this all out. Amrat Beresha, first you said V'lo b'merkava b'yachid, that even an individual, one person, cannot study Merkava. That's the chariot mysticism. V'hadar Amras, and then you said Elim ken hayachacham maybe midato, unless you're wise and understand things yourself. So that person is allowed, right? But like, how could you have gotten wise if you hadn't studied it? Right? It's like, how do it's which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Hachikam, this is what the Mishnah means. It's the clause is referring to all of these limits, right? All of these things, the three people for sexual transgressions, the two people for creation, and the one person for merkava. Unless that person is a wise person who could understand it by himself. So in other words, he's like the student has to be wise enough to understand what he's being taught. So let's look at the sexual transgressions. You can't have three people in the class. My time is it because here we get to the dry legalism, like it says ish al kol she'er b'saro. So there's three people in the sentence. Every man, but like the way it's phrased in Hebrew is a man, meaning every man. So that's two people. El kol she'er b'saro, two. You can't sleep with a relative, right? So that's the third person in this verse. And about that it says, don't come close to uncovering their nakedness. So by coming close, which is a euphemism for sex, right? By coming close, it means like don't approach the subject. But if that's the case, only have to deceive. Many times we have this expression, every man, right? And we don't apply this that you can't study these things unless you have you can't study them with three or more people. For example, every person who curses God, every person who sacrifices to Moloch, right? We don't apply this rule. Ella, so we can't say that's the reason. Ella, the rabbis is anachrim. There, what do we say? Why does it say ish to include non-Jews in these prohibitions? That non-Jews are also in the seven mitzvahs of Bnei Noach. They are prohibited from cursing God and from idolatry. The same applies to sexual transgressions. Non-Jews are also prohibited in these. They're also prohibited. So we still don't have a source for why like where does this come from? This rule of three.
I never understood I never understood how you can make a law for people who don't accept the law. I never understood that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, how can you make a law for, how do you have a law of like international law? Like, why can I impose my ideas on somebody not even living in my society?
No, but
Right?
there's
It's a
a base.
paradox. It's a good question.
No, there's a basis for it. There are international organizations that exist that that countries are members of. So, I mean, that's how that could be applied.
Yeah, but I don't think so. I think that you could, I may be wrong here, but I think you could prosecute, war criminals even if they haven't signed on to the Geneva Convention. There's
Yeah.
just certain things that are understood to be universal morality, shall we say, that everyone is assumed to be obligated in.
No.
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think
that-
we're not unique, is what I'm saying.
No, that's because
No?
to me it's more like we pass a law about what if a crime is committed in Russia, the punishment is 7 years.
Yeah.
Well, if the United States passed a law, that 3 strikes you're out for Russians, in crimes committed in Russia. I mean, like, Mapitom. I mean, it makes no.
It makes no sense. Well, so I'm saying, in principle, I agree with you, but I think all I'm pointing out is I think that Jewish law is not unique that way. There are other examples in other legal systems where not only the members of the society or the group are bound by the laws, but they even make laws that apply to outsiders. But that doesn't really answer the question. Like, how can you do that, right?
I mean,
the question really is, where do you get the rights?
Yeah, if it's a ger toshav that's living in your area, then I understand it, But this is just like non-Jews all over the world, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, no, so it's a good question. I'm just pointing out, I think we're not unique in that, but that doesn't answer the question. So good question. So I'll have to leave that open. So all right, so where do we get the prohibition? Where do we get this idea of groups, large groups for studying sexual transgressions? Because it's written, you should keep my laws, my whatever, however you translate that. Ushmartem tre mishmarti chad. Ushmartem is in plural, although it means like you plural should keep. Mishmarti is like one, is a singular. So there's like, again, this is it's a bit of a reach, but the Gemara does this often, right? It's trying to find a source for three. So here's a plural and a singular, so that's three. And the Torah says, what should you be doing? Not to do these sexual transgressions. So the Gemara says, well, that's not a good proof either. You have this plural also written for the example Shabbos and Matzah, and we don't say Ushmartem es hakodesh. You should guard the holy, the temple, the Mishkan, from being invaded by people who don't belong there. So hachinami, should we say you can't teach those things either? That's not the case. What does it mean you can't teach it in groups of larger than three? You can't get into the details. My Tama, Svarhu is logic. When two people are sitting with their teacher, so one is asking questions and having a discussion with the teacher. The other is listening, right? But if you have three people, one is engaging the teacher. What are the other two doing? The other two are talking to each other, right? They're not so interested in the other guy's question. So they'll be, talking about the news, or maybe they'll be talking about something else. But the point is, they won't necessarily be paying attention as closely to the teacher. And they might not, be listening closely enough, and they won't know the details of what the teacher is teaching. And they might come to to make a mistake in the laws, right? Basically, to permit something that's really prohibited. So when it says Yachi kol Torah name, wait a minute, if that's the case, why are you singling out? Why are you singling out sexual transgressions? You should say the same thing about anything in the Torah, right? Like, don't teach anything if there's more than two students, because while you're engaging one student, the other ones will be chatting with each other. So Gemara says, "Arayos shane," but sexual transgressions are different. Diamar mar, because we said Gezel Arayos nafsho mechamdasan and misavelen, because both sexual transgressions and theft people really want. There's the Yetzer Hara for this. It's like something that would be, it's easy to be led astray. Okay, so other things, what's kosher, what's not kosher, so you don't know something, you're going to look it up, but or you go ask your teacher. But in the case of sexual transgressions, if you don't know something, you'll convince yourself that it's okay because you really want it.
Yeah,
So Yachi Gezel, pardon me?
I was just going to say Gezel too. I mean, yeah.
So Yachi Gezel Name. So then you should say the same thing about theft. But we don't say that you can only teach theft in the groups of less than three. So the answer is Arayos Ben Bafanav Ben Shlo Bafanav Nafesh Yitzray. But in the case of sexual transgressions, people are always thinking about sex. Okay, they're
not necessarily Arayot. I mean, but maybe. I mean, okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Right. In other words, you're always in danger. Let's put it this way: you're always in danger of convincing yourself that some sexual act that you want to do is permitted, right? Even if it's not so much, right? So it's easy to convince yourself. So therefore, we want to make sure that you're really paying attention in class. Okay, but Gezel, b'fanav nafesh yitzrei, shelo b'fanav nafesh yitzrei. It's not as much danger. Sure, if I have the opportunity, if the jeweler isn't looking and I can swipe the diamond out of off the table, that's one thing. But it's not like I'm always looking for opportunities to steal. So it's not as tempting, shall we say? Okay, that's a little bit. Well, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. It seems a little weak. But the whole idea that maybe it's true that if you're in a class, you're not maybe paying attention as much as if you're in a one-on-one or one-on-two situation. That's probably true.
I mean, although if getting a shiur on the Arayot, I don't think that's really, you know what I mean? If I'm listening to a shiur about what's I don't think that's going to stimulate my Yetzer Hara. I mean.
Right. No, I think what it's saying is that if you're in a situation where you have to decide if something permitted or not, then we want to make sure that you were really paying attention in class for you to make that decision. Right. It's not like in the class you're going to be led astray. It's like later on, when you're faced with the situation, we want to make sure that your education was detailed enough that you'll make the right choice and not convince yourself that, maybe this, I don't remember this from class, but I'm sure my teacher would have said it's okay. I mean, really, he did say it in class. You just weren't paying attention.
Even if you were paying attention, what about the Yetzer Hara?
Well, what are you going to do? Listen, I mean, you got people will. There's no guarantee against the Yetzer Hara, but we're trying to set it up so that you have every opportunity to defeat the Yetzer Hara.
Okay.
All right. All right. Now we switch to Maaseh Bereshis, creation. Love Maaseh Bereshis b'shnayim. You can't teach in a class of two or more. Immediately, where's this source? The Torah states in Devarim, in Moshe's valedictory speech, he says, ask about the early days, the first days, and that's in the singular. The context there is Moshe's kind of trying to convince the people that God is really looking out for them. It's like, look way back in history, but the Gemara is taking it as who can study the early days, meaning the days of creation, an individual. Kisha'alna, it's stated in the singular. Yachi shal ben shnayim shalim. You can't have two people in the class. Yachol yishal adam kodem shenibra ha'olam. Does this mean that, okay, so an individual can ask. You can ask about the early days. Can you ask about before the creation? It's from the day that God created man, right? But not before. That you can't even inquire about, even an individual. Maybe you can't even inquire about the 6 days of creation, because when was man created? On the sixth day. What about days 1 through 5? So can you not study those? No, it's including the days that were before you, meaning before humans were created. So that includes the 5 days, the first 5 days of creation. So maybe that gives you unlimited license. Like you can inquire about the nature of the celestial beings and the underworld and what then before time and after time. No, you can only inquire from the one end of heaven to the other. You can inquire about, from one end of heaven to the other, but beyond that, beyond the heavens, you can't inquire. So this, I have no idea what this means. It depends how you understand what are these celestial beings above the heavens, and we'll get into some detail, but I have no idea what to say about it. I welcome any cosmologists who have comments.
Well, I mean, the question here is like, see, I think when this is written, there's no difference between science and mysticism, right? I mean,
Right.
although there is, I don't know. I mean, because, I mean, the Greeks were kind of like basing things on science, so,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like,
So are you asking about, like, does this apply to astrophysics, or to
yeah, exactly.
what happened before the Big Bang, or things like that?
Exactly. I mean, but I don't know if it's really addressing that situation, or if it's addressing like, you know, mystical points.
Yeah.
What I
Well,
mean?
one could say, and I'm not claiming that this is what the Gemara is saying, but one could say that, if by inquiring into the natural history of creation, one is weakening belief in God.
Right.
I don't happen to think that's true, but it could be true for a lot of people.
Right.
So maybe that's what it's getting at, but I'm just speculating.
We had a pretty good grasp of the movements of the moon at that point. We were basing the calendar and the holidays
But
on
that's
the moon.
that's within the heavens, right? That is explicitly said here, that that's within the heavens. You can inquire about that. What it means, as we will see. So I'm giving you a sneak preview. We will see that what is it that is beyond the heavens? It's something called the Chayos, and these winged celestial creatures, angelic type creatures that are above the heavens, whatever that means.
Yeah.
We'll see that the rest tomorrow.
There's a lot of stuff in the Gemara about constellations, right? And
Yeah. So those are within the heavens.
Okay.
That's not included in this prohibition. We're talking about, don't inquire about things beyond the heavens.
Right. But
So
isn't
whether,
there stuff in the Gemara about like different constellations have different powers and stuff like that?
Yeah, the dominion over different nations or groups of people. Yeah.
So
There's some good YouTube videos about current cosmology.
Oh, yeah.
You see Sean Carroll and Lawrence Krauss make it somewhat understandable.
Okay, thank you for the reference. I fear that I will have the same experience. I'll watch them and understand them, and then as soon as I turn off the video, I'll be back to my complete, I won't remember or grasp any of it. I have a hard time picturing, the orbits of the moon and the earth and the sun and how they all fit together. So I'm not the person to try to figure all this out. Okay, let's just finish up this topic. So now that you're using that as a source, this verse that you can inquire about, you should inquire about things that are from one end of heaven to the other. So that includes time, right? Why do you have to also say in that verse, from the day that God created man, right? That if you can't, like, time is also a dimension, you might say in modern parlance, right? So once you've said you can only study the observable heavens, then you should also only be able to study observable time, not before time or after time. So Rabbi Elazar And I may be, I think I'm probably maybe, layering my limited understanding of the dimension of time over this Gemara. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I'm trying to understand it in the context that I kind of understand. Rabbi Elazar. So we say this is like Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, Adam Rishon min Haaretz ad man, the first man, his dimensions were from the earth to the sky. Shenamar. That's from. So that is what is learned from this verse, from the day that God created man on the earth. I'd say until so in other words, this verse is not referring to this part of the verse is not referring to what you can study, but rather it's saying, oh, you know what, Adam Arishon, the first man, was from the Min Haaretz ad Ksei Hashemayim, from the earth to the sky. That's how big he was. The Kavan Shasarach, once he sinned, God put his hand on man and squished him down and minimized him to our current stature. The Shenamar, as it says, you have formed me, you have built me backwards and forwards, or later and earlier, and then you put your hand on me. So this is a oblique reference to God kind of pressing down on man to minimize him after the sin. Amar Rita says, man, the first man reached from one end of the world to the other. That's from this verse, that from the day that from the day that God created man on the earth to the edge of the sky. But once he sinned, the same idea, God placed his hand on man and minimized him. The same proof source. So wait, so did he reach from one end of the earth to the other, or from the earth to the sky? Right? No contradiction. That's the same distance, right? It's the same measure. From one end of the earth to the other is the same as the distance from the earth to the rakia, to the sky. Okay, and we'll pick it up here tomorrow. Tomorrow we will meet at 7:30 due to the holiday schedule.
Right.
Apologies to Canadians. Is there a Canadian holiday too? No. Okay. Have a good day, everybody.
President's Day. Okay, thanks, Bob.